Welcome to this afternoon session. Before I introduce the two panelists on our next session, I was asked by Stephen to clarify what Felice said when she talked about toll-free. Now, what I'm going to do is a bit cheeky, actually, because I'm going to clarify what I think Felice said, and more to the point, what I hope she said, because if I'm right in what I think she said, it's actually very interesting. But I did ask her if this is what she said and this is what she meant. Where are you, Felice? Oh, this is great. She's not here right now. Right, this is my moment. Okay. What she was talking about was that if an author publishes with AER, a journal, that author gets the right to a URL link to the copy of record of that publication without the payment of an additional fee. That, I think, is particularly significant, because if that is the case, as indeed it is, and if that's been agreed with Sage as not damaging Sage's financial model, which I believe it has, that does a number of interesting things. First of all, of course, as Felice said, it's much more useful for an author to have a URL link to the paper rather than to have a PDF to distribute, because if you have a URL link, you can get access to the metrics. And the metrics are fascinating because they essentially tell you who's reading your paper where. And that, of course, is a version of getting pretty close to getting something that begins to become a proxy for a citation index, and everybody's very interested in that. But the second thing that, of course, you can do, presumably, and this is the bit where I hope it's what Felice means, and I hope it's what Sage means. The second thing, of course, that can happen is that it gives your institutional repository the opportunity to provide that link. It also means you, as an individual, can aggregate your own content across different publishers on your own profile. Now, if all of that is true, or were it to become true in a future world, because I can see probably that I've just got that wrong.
Yeah, can I just say, I think this might be a slight twist on what's known as e-off-groups in the industry, and this is standard.
Right, there you go, thank you, so I think I'm right. The interesting thing, and I want to come to this in the closing comments, is that this could, in fact, in itself, probably satisfy quite a lot of the requirements of what we actually mean by the intent of gold open access. So just hold that thought in your minds, because it's a very good example of the sort of innovation that we were about trying to drive through Finch, and that this conference is very much about. So hopefully that partially answers the question that I was asked to address on Felice's behalf, but we can come back to it later. It wasn't? No? Absolutely.
Because it's an author service that has been there, as a learning society, it's been there always.
Then let's bring it out in the panel discussion. We get all 6 people up on the table at the front, because I think there's audience interest in this particular issue. So it would be really good to develop that aspect of it in the discussion, because it probably needs to be much more widely known. So let's pick that point up in the general discussion. For this session, it's a pleasure to introduce our 2 panelists. Firstly, Sally Hardy, who's the Chief Executive of the Regional Studies Association. She's a member of the Academy of Social Sciences. She's a member of the Princeton Press Advisory Group, and she's a member of the British Academy of Management, and she's on their governance group. She's obviously going to give us a perspective from the regional studies point of view. And she's joined by Stephen Bailey, Professor of Public Law and Head of the School of Law at the University of Nottingham. And it's a particular a pleasure to have somebody from the University of Nottingham, which in many respects has been a leader in a lot of this work over the past few years, and many of us admire what's happened at the University of Nottingham. So great to have Stephen with us. He's now no longer the Vice President-elect of the Society of Legal Scholars, because he is actually the Vice President, because he's now duly elected and taken office. Sally's going to speak first, and then we'll go straight on to Stephen. And that will give us enough time to pick up some questions to them at the end of the session. So, Sally, over to you.
So, thank you very much for inviting me to come to speak to you. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity. I've got quite a lot to say, so if I speak very quickly, please forgive me. I am the Chief Executive of the Regional Studies Association, but I hope that my comments will be somewhat wider. This is not going to be an advertisement for why you should become one of our members. So, I'm going to start with some key messages because I want to make sure that I hammer them home. The open access principle is embraced by the RSA and by most of the other societies with whom I have contact. And as part of that, we embrace also the challenge that that presents to us. Learned societies make a key contribution to research in the wider academy. I would make a plea, let's be careful with them. Our contribution needs to be more widely recognised and understood. And I've given you there a quote from Hazel Norman. She wrote on a Wiley Blackwell publishing blog about a meeting held in January of 35 learned societies, making exactly the same point. The shift to open access is going to challenge societies. My third key message is please give us time to adjust our business models. Some learned societies, some small societies, particularly those perhaps in the modern languages, take up to 90% of their income from journals. They run very lean organisations. In these cases, it's possible to see scenarios where the very livelihoods of those societies could be threatened. If they're lost, and where they have vulnerable disciplines in the UK, that would be a real concern. The embargo period, we've heard a lot about embargo periods over the last day and a half. I regard this as absolutely critical to allowing the Finch mixed economy to work. Research by the Publishing Consortium suggests that 1 year is a minimum in social sciences in order to protect the subscriptions model. Now, that is what we have at the moment under RC UK, and I'm very grateful for that, but there are indications that the pressure will be to shorten it. Then CCBY, we've heard a lot about licences as well. The Regional Studies Association would prefer CCBY-NC, and I think once we've looked into it more fully, we may well move to a stance where we would prefer the non-derivative form of the contract, the licence as well. So David Green made a number of assertions this morning about how this is likely to affect learned societies. What I hope I'm going to do is take up from where he left off and give some evidence for it. So I'm starting with the idea, the point that knowledge across the sector is patchy. Societies that are active and are in policy-engaged umbrella organisations like the Academy of Social Sciences or ALPS, or who use commercial publishers, are better placed than smaller societies that maybe don't have paid staff. The speed of change favours actually larger, more engaged societies. At a recent meeting, we did a straw poll, and 10 out of the 11 societies in the room published with a commercial partner. What that tells me is that these societies will be affected by things that impact on our publishers. So this is not just a question about publishers. It really does affect the learned societies. Society responses will be different because the impact is going to be nuanced. Now, I am going to use regional studies data to illustrate this for you. We'll be in the vanguard of change because 67% of our income comes from publishing. I did a little model. If we published every 2011 article with gold open access with an article processing fee of nearly $3,000, we would take a drop of 63% in our publishing income, 45% of our total income. Now, that is a challenge to any organisation, and it's a real challenge to a small organisation. It certainly focuses the mind. Now, we know that it won't happen like that. We know this is not a fiscal cliff, but it's a fiscal slope, and we're quite interested to find out a little bit more about the angle of that. We're also going to be at the forefront of this change because we're policy-oriented as an organisation. Many of the articles that we publish have public funding. 57% of UK articles in 2011 were funded by RC UK. Our journals are international. That could be both a strength and or a weakness. In our major journal, Regional Studies, which is over there, 42% of the articles were European, and many of them are funded by FP7 programmes. If we roll that forward to looking at what will happen in Horizon 2020, it gives us a kind of further vulnerability. The 21% North American, I was very pleased to hear Felice's comments about a more considered approach going to happen in the US. So let's look at a little bit, oh, that's the wrong thing. Let's look a little bit wider across the social sciences. Data I want to talk about very briefly. We know very little about the sector in the round. There's some information in the Charity Commission, some on Companies House, and you can resort to individual society websites. There is almost nothing on the collective. I couldn't even find a definitive list of UK societies, never mind the number of global societies. We need to do much to learn about our own sector so that we can be our own advocates. I am going to give some figures. They're drawn on some fairly quick and dirty research carried out for me by my colleague Aurélie Amber-Claire, using public records for 9 social science societies. The data comes with a severe health warning. So publications income as a percentage of total income across these 9 societies, the average was 32%, quite a broad range from 1 to 67%, including both subs and non-subs income. The median income was £450,000, a material sum in anyone's books. Median reinvestment, this figure's really flaky, was between 22 and 31%, but it's quite difficult to tell because not everybody presents their accounts in the same way. So that really needs to be treated cautiously. When working with the data that I had, it's hard to make generalisations about impacts, in part because the impact of different kinds of publishing contracts makes it difficult to see what reinvestment is in publishing by individual societies. But to give you some kind of idea of the scale of what we're talking about, societies with an income of around 1 million seem to employ around 5 people, and the over 5 million income societies employ more than 50 people. So, how do we use the money that we receive? I'm going to talk about all sources of income. None of us seem to only talk about publishing income. I've gone wildly wrong here. Okay. Journals are still very important to societies. We did a hands up at a recent CEOs meeting. 82% of CEOs thought that journals were very important or important benefit of membership. That gives possible warning signs for learned societies that if their materials are made open access, they may start to lose their members. If we'd asked how important journal income is, we'd have had a completely different, a much stronger answer. So, what do we do with the money? Or you could look at it another way. What's the contribution of social science societies to the academy and to research? James Hopkins, who we funded to do a case studentship with the ESRC, talks about learned societies facilitating interaction by building and sustaining connections, relationships, and access to other individuals and knowledge. He's using a developing social capital argument. Using work of economic sociologists like Burt, you could talk about learned societies filling structural holes, linking and bridging knowledge gaps represented by the disconnections between academics, policymakers, practitioners, and other research users. Simon, who I had the privilege of working with in the 1980s, says, by acting as a connector, oh, here we are. Oh. That slide seems to have disappeared. I'll tell you about it. Here we are. He says that by acting as a connector and a facilitator, value is realised. And I really think that's right. The chart there shows how learned societies work at the interstices of professional associations and pressure groups. So what do? We promote and nurture an academic discipline or disciplines at the national and international scale. We lead on knowledge exchange activities between sectors, academics, policymakers, and practitioners. We offer accreditation of members to uphold standards, sometimes formally, sometimes using post-nominals, indicating individuals' embeddedness and commitments to their field. And we all seek to serve the public interest. So So here you have a list of some of the core activities of learned societies. I'm not going to work through it. Most societies do most of those things. Some do other things. It is a bit of a mixed bag. What I would like to do is just pick out 3 or 4 of those headings and illustrate from Regional Studies Association why these activities are important. So taking conferences and events, more than 1,000 people attended our core events in 2012. Remember, we're a smallish society. They included parliamentarians, the Commissioner for Regional Policy within the European Commission, and other key policy influencers. We only hold 5 core events. One was in Beijing in China, and one was in Delft in Holland. The balance were in Germany and the UK. On research, we've recently funded a PhD student. We've run 19 research networks with many published outcomes, and we awarded 8 early career grants of £10,000 apiece. Publishing, we currently publish 2 journals. At the end of 2013, we'll publish 4 journals. One of those will be a brand new open access only journal called Regional Studies and Regional Science Open, which we're doing with colleagues at Routledge. Our reinvestment in publishing activity will increase by 5% next year. Really, the point that I want to make about this slide comes under the knowledge exchange heading. The Regional Studies Association and many other learned societies are heavily engaged in knowledge exchange. We held 2 events in the House of Commons this year, one on the demise of the RDAs and the rise of local enterprise partnerships, the other in conjunction with the Royal Geographical Society and the Academy of Social Science on high-speed rail. We work extensively with policy networks. We've got our own policy advisory board. We influence the emergence of regional policy internationally through these networks. We have a board member from the United Nations. We have committee members from the OECD, the World Bank, World Habitat, and the president of the IBM Academy sits on one of our groupings. These are activities that affect people's well-being and which will be hard to replicate without learned societies. It's the value of having a neutral and collective voice. We're also heavily involved in media engagement and very active in terms of making consultation responses. Networks, we're international. We have representation in formal representation in 47 different countries. In terms of research investment, we invested £120,000 this year directly in research activities. The important point I want to make is not what Regional Studies Association has done, but what collectively, say, even 100 societies in the UK do. We're all contributing financially and in other less tangible ways through our representational and advocacy roles. Right. So now, I want to look at how robust society finances are. How can we cope? This is highly variable. Across the 9 societies that we looked at, 2 showed deficit balances. The Regional Studies Association has run with robust surpluses for years, often helped by investment in performance, but now budgets are more finely balanced. In 2012 and 13, we're going to make planned deficits. Now, this is partly because we're starting 2 new journals, partly because we're giving so much money in research grants as a result of the austerity cuts, partly due to changes in accounting conventions, and partly because the European Commission has changed VAT rules for conferences run in the European Union, which gives us a VAT liability that we didn't have previously. The degree of vulnerability across organisations varies enormously. It depends on the scale of your organisation, the amount of your income that comes from publishing, the number of members that you have, the subject area that you're in. You can charge wildly differentiated fees depending on whether you're in business and management or some other fields. The point I'd like to make is that some societies are already running in quite lean ways, and cuts in publishing income are very likely to impact on service delivery to members and to the wider community. So, what's the future for learned societies? Do we have one? Well, I point you to our membership graph. Look at the top line, that's total membership. You can see that we're on a very steeply rising curve. Those are figures to the end of 2011. To 2012, if anything, that curve gets a little bit steeper. So what I would say to policymakers is let's be careful about what we risk by moving without a full consultation and without modelling of unexpected outcomes. So, Chairman, I'm moving to my conclusion. You'll be happy to hear. So in summary, we form communities of knowledge and practice. We're absolutely critical for the representation of our fields and our members. We are the key scale for government and others to consult with. Our interests cover the individual researcher, departments, HEIs, national and international interests in our fields. Our collective voice enables us to publish journals, to stage conferences, and to work at the policy interface in a scale, in a manner, and with an authority that individual HEIs or private providers would be hard-pressed to match. In 2012, there is a continuing demand from academics, policymakers, and practitioners to be active members of learned societies. In my 26 years in this sector, open access is the second challenge to the learned society business model. The first came when we moved to online availability of journals. And that did cause a similar kind of anxiety. The response to that was community building and a rebalancing of membership benefits. The challenge this time is how we restructure our business models to embrace open access without diminishing the service to our members and our wider community. That's inevitably going to involve more community building and quite a lot of experimentation with different kinds of models. So I invite you to follow our progress with our new open access journal, Regional Studies and Regional Science Open. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I'm quite sure that these were themes that are also going to be picked up by Rita in her presentation later on, and that we will also pick up on the panel. I hope Rita's got something left to say. I hope you've got something left to say. Thank you very much, Rita. Stephen.
Thank you. So I'm an academic lawyer, currently Vice President of the Society of Legal Scholars, but I want to make it clear from the outset that these comments reflect my personal views rather than a society position. The Society is focusing particularly upon responding to the forthcoming HEFCE consultation, which I think arguably is an absolutely vital cog in this particular machine. I should also say at the outset that I've taken a broad rather than narrow approach to the title of this session. So I'm going to say something about the range of law-learned societies, something about the Society of Legal Scholars and its activities, and something more generally about the vitally important support and representational roles of all learned societies. Ironically, perhaps, the government's decision to impose open access requirements both pose a threat to some of those societies and shows why the continued existence of all is crucial. And I don't want to stress the point about this being a government decision. I think I have much sympathy with Dame Janet Finch and the way in which her name is bandied about. As a public lawyer, I am familiar with a concept called Wednesbury unreasonableness. Okay? This concept of unreasonableness in public law derives from a case that involved Wednesbury Corporation in 1948. But in a sense, it casts a slur on the good people of Wednesbury even today. And when thinking about the Finch Report, it seems to me we need to think about the different phases of it. Pre-Finch, Finch, and post-Finch, and keep them well separate. And also, I do wonder whether we ought to start a movement that, instead of talking about Finch, talks about Willets. Because after all, he is the minister in charge of this policy. And certainly, it would be wholly wrong for there to be any concept of Finch unreasonableness. Whether there is a concept of Willets unreasonableness, I leave to you to judge. Law is blessed with a number of separate subject associations, at least in part for historical reasons. These include the Society of Legal Scholars, the Socio-Legal Studies Association, the Association of Law Teachers, and the Committee of Heads of University Law Schools. And then there are more specialist societies beyond that. They have complementary roles. Most do run a journal, I think invariably in partnership with a commercial publisher. The Society of Legal Scholars is the largest of these, with a membership of about 3,000, and its members have interests across the full spectrum of legal scholarship. And I should say at once that while the Society has a journal, the very highly regarded Legal Studies published by Wiley Blackwell, the income we get from the publishers forms less than 1/10 of our overall income. We are not reliant on that source of income to nearly the same extent as other learned societies. Accordingly, it's not possible to separate out the activities specifically supported by the publisher's income. The academic activities the Society pursues in support of academic law include, as you would expect, a large annual conference meeting over 4 days with 14 specialist subject sections and plenaries, a research purposes fund to which academics can apply for support, particularly useful for early career researchers to start ticking the research income box on their CVs, support for a major seminar each year that tends to lead to a prestigious publication, a centenary lecture series taken around to different parts of the UK, our publications, Legal Studies and Academic Journal, a reporter updating our law school activities twice a year, and a regular electronic SLS news with information about legal events and jobs. Yes, there are jobs occasionally, even today. And then our guidance on standards for law libraries is widely respected by the professional bodies and institutions. But apart from academic activities, there is the wider representative role of the Society. One area where this is of crucial importance arises from the fact that a law degree that complies with the requirements of the Bar Standards Board and the Solicitors Regulation Authority is a qualifying law degree and the main vehicle for completion of the so-called academic stage in qualifying as a barrister or solicitor. It's generally accepted that an English law degree that isn't a qualifying law degree has little, if any, status in the student marketplace. It so happens at the moment the professional bodies are conducting a legal education and training review, and the Society is organising itself very effectively in responding to that because that has the potential to have a significant impact on our work. This leads me to the point I wish to make about the role of learned societies in general. In my view, that they continue to flourish is essential for the health of higher education. And this is reasonably obvious, but I will say it nevertheless. I am the father of 2 teenage boys. One has just started a history degree, the other is in his last year in the 6th form. When I ask them questions like, "What did you do at school today?" they say, "Stuff." If I repeat the question, they say, "Stuff," again, only a bit louder, indicating that this conversation must now cease. However, when it comes to thinking about going to university, they lurch to the other end of the spectrum. The first thing they're interested in is choosing a subject. This may be a recognised discipline, it may be a subject area. At the moment, I say one's doing history, the other wants to do performance in popular music. Set his heart on the course with 1,000 applications for 30 places. What's plan B, I ask? And I get no answer. But anyway, and I suspect there may be some parents around the room with analogous issues. But anyway, intending students start their thinking with a discipline or a subject area. And this forms a central focus of the student's relationship with the university. And here we hit a conundrum, because there's a tension between the existence and importance of disciplines or areas of study on the one hand and trends in modern university management on the other. In many, if not all, higher education institutions, there's an overt pressure to move to a smaller, sometimes much smaller, number of budget units, as they are felicitously called. The smallest discipline areas will be chopped or merged. There's a particular obsession with wanting a very small number of discrete administrative support units, providing an interface with the student, a model that tends to rather obscure the fact that the student's relationship is with a discipline or subject area, not with a faculty or a college. But there we are. That is a feature of modern university life. Sometimes with merged departments, of course, the criteria for merger are either obscure or, in some cases, hilarious. And the reasons for merger are commonly along the lines of, well, we want to promote interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary work. So why it is thought that that should work by merging together 2 small departments who basically hate each other at the start and will wish to spend all their time arguing, I really don't know. But again, it is a feature of how we live. The same kind of phenomenon can be seen with the reduction of subpanels for Ref 2014. Now, I am not arguing that traditional subject disciplines or discipline areas or subject areas are the only organising criteria of importance. But I do think they can properly be seen as visible islands within a sea of stuff, and commonly the places to which both students and academic staff want to swim, and a vital counterbalance to the powerful pressures for centralisation and simplification at work within higher education institutions. Ways must be found to ensure their work continues. Janet Finch stated yesterday that she'd identified an apparent conundrum. On the one hand, learned societies were critical of the profits of publishers. On the other hand, they were complaining of the loss of income from publishing as endangering their existence. I believe there's a possible answer to this. I may be wrong, but this is at least a possibility. And that is, the sector generally has been complaining about the allegedly excessive profits made by large publishers in the STEM subject. Even if the same publishers were publishing in arts, humanities and social sciences, I would be rather surprised if those earnings from STEM journals were in any way subsidising learned societies in arts, humanities and social science. There is no inconsistency when societies in art areas raise the points they are now making. Finally, it is arguable that the government's policy that led to the Finch Report, not to the report itself, is capable of causing considerable damage to academic work. It raises quite probably insoluble problems about rationing and many other difficulties. What I believe also is that this poses the first serious challenge to legitimate academic freedom that I have encountered in my career. And if I'm right on that, learning societies need to work together more effectively than they ever have before, because if they don't, who else will? HEFCE? Research councils? Certainly not. UUK has been relatively quiet so far as I know. And that, I think, brings it back to us. And organising ourselves to respond loudly and effectively to the forthcoming HEFCE consultation is, in my view, one vital step. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Stephen and Sally both return in the panel a little later on. So we've got a couple of minutes for questions and points to them before we go on to Rita's talk. Can I invite you to ask them points you want to raise? Here we go.
Perkins, Chief Executive and Director of the Society for Research in Higher Education, and as a learned society, one almost with an identical profile, slightly less good financially, but in all other respects similar to what Sally has described. And thank you both, and Sally in particular, for your masterly exposition of what the learned societies do and all that you do to encourage us to continue to build our public profile. As I think those of you who know me, I hate cliches and I hate management speak, but I am going to use one. I do want to ask you, I do want to raise the elephant in the room. I don't mean me, I mean green access. And, over the last couple of days, I'm hearing a great deal of talk about green access. And I think from the Learned Society's point of view, we have, starting on the back foot, we've moved fast in a number of regards, and we're getting, greater clarity. But we have, many of us, excellent relationships with our publishing partners, and we publish with, more than one publisher. But we are in, and we have to accept that, a sort of push me, pull you, a sort of symbiotic relationship. And of course, to not go for gold in many ways is to cut off the branch that we're sitting on. But I hear much talk in the academy about green open access, and I think we just have to ask ourselves that question. Even if we cut off our own branch, where realistically do we really think the learned societies should be?
Thank you. Sally? And then...
Thank you very much. Of course, that's a completely unanswerable question at the moment, although Rita might be going to give it her best shot in a moment. You are right, and we are in a difficult position, really, because we know that those of us that have very large, successful journals, we know that multiplying the number of articles by the gold article processing charge doesn't match our income. It's tempting to think that we could hide things behind the subscriptions paywall. I think critically the embargo period here is what we need to be paying attention to in terms of our advocacy work with the policymakers. Ideally, for the next few years, we need a mixed economy, just really to buy ourselves enough time to see how this is going to roll out, what might happen in North America, what might happen in Europe. I don't have any answers for you, but I'm totally sympathetic to the question.
Stephen?
Well, nothing particular to add beyond the point about, I think, focusing attention on the timescale for all this is absolutely crucial. In that, this has all the hallmarks of a policy that's thought up by a small group of people and then decided on and then rolled out. I was much struck yesterday by the proposition right at the start of the conference, which was the principles of Finch are fine. There are all these problems. And that's it, really. And the problem being that there comes a point where, unless we can be sure we can solve all the problems in a way that does not cause serious damage in various directions, then I think there has to be some reflection back upon whether the principles are appropriate. And that is why also the real source for that is Mr. Willett. It's not Dame Janet.
Thank you. As one of at least two of the small group of people, I'm really pleased to see this deflected onto David Willett, so I was getting quite nervous there. That's great, thank you. Kristen,
yes.
I'll take this as the last one because you can also come back on the panel with other questions, so please go ahead.
Yes, John Davis, retired professor at University of Liverpool, but also member of the Publications Committee of the Institute of Classical Studies in London. I have one rather brutal question which takes up what you have just said, and that is, even in a subject area which is united, as that of Ms. Hardy is, but as the lawyers are not, how much effect do you think representations to HEFCE are going to have on this matter?
Thank you.
Well, one has to start from the presumption that none at all, right? But in my view, that is not a reason for not doing it. And usually, the way forward is to find ways in which a policy that has not been thought through in the first instance, if implemented, damages some other precious part of government policy. And I think there are reasonably good grounds to say this is actually going to be one of them.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you very much indeed to Sally and Stephen and for that contribution, and you'll be back later. Thank you. You're going to put it up. Brilliant. Thank you. Yes, you did. There you go. Thank you. It's a particular pleasure to introduce Rita Gardner, whom many people here will, of course, know, and was a fellow member of the Finch Group, which we're not calling the Finch Group. That's right. Rita is director of the Royal Geographical Society. She's was a member of the Finch Group. She's chair of the Academy of Social Sciences Learned Society Working Group on Open Access, so particularly appropriate for her to be giving this presentation this afternoon. And again, I'm sure Rita will allow enough time at the end of her talk for us to ask questions and pull up discussion. So over to you.
Martin, thank you. It's a great pleasure to address you here this afternoon, colleagues, friends, and other learned societies. I'd like to start with some key messages from Finch. I think probably over the last 2 days, you've heard much of what I'm going to say in different ways. Let's see if I can bring it together and pose a few more questions and also make some suggestions. At the end of my talk, I have 3, and it's a very personal talk. I'm not talking on behalf of anyone else. But I have 3 proposals that I feel strongly we should be putting to government to help us through this transition period. And I'd welcome your views on those towards the end. So some key messages on Finch. I don't expect you to, I'm not going to read through all this, but we all know that Finch's context was not if, but how do we implement open access. We know, and it's written right the way through the Finch Report, that it's essential to sustain sustainability, one of those 3 key words, access, sustainability, and excellence. It's essential to sustain the key and valuable features of the communication system and the players who need the revenues to support their core activities. That, of course, is the learned societies. Sorry, let me go back there. And it realised that we can only bring about the benefits of open access in a sustainable way if we have coordinated action by the universities, funders, researchers, libraries, and everybody else involved. They asked the government to consider carefully the balance between the aims on the one hand of increasing access and on the other of avoiding undue risk to the sustainability of subscription-based journals. And made the point that, and this has been picked up very well by the Publishers Association recently, and I do refer you to that information, it's been picked up very well, where an appropriate level of dedicated funding is not provided to meet the costs of open access publishing, and a journal is offering a gold route, but if the researcher doesn't have access to the money to pay for a gold route, then we believe it would be unreasonable to require embargo periods of less than 12 months, and the suggestions therefore were for 12 and 24 months. So there's 2 routes to green, in a sense, that we're talking about here. What Finch said about risk is that policymakers should be cautious about pushing for reductions in embargo periods, and that there should be monitoring of unintended consequences. Learned societies were recognised in the Finch Report. You may have views as to whether they were recognised enough or not, but any risks to the surpluses they secure through their publications imperil also the wider activities, some of which Sally has talked about just now, and to keep under review the position of learned societies, recognising that the challenges will be acute for them and for many of the other key players in that group of players that sat round the table in Finch. They're acute for universities too and other players. But if learned societies can make the shift to open access journals on a sustainable basis, they should be able to maintain many of the services they provide the research community. Clearly, the words there are on a sustainable basis. So, we are 6 months on from Finch, and I think what I've just said echoes the point that was so beautifully, wittily put about we should be calling this the Willits continuation rather than the Finch Report. The perception of our position 6 months on as learned societies. The issue, I think, is, and I think this echoes what many people have said, it's how Finch has been implemented, and particularly the speed at which it has been implemented. As learned societies, we have had an enormous exogenous shock. Some of our learned societies require get only 5% of their income from their publishing. For an input into the Finch review process, I pulled together a lot of information on learned societies, and the range of income amounts is from 5 to 99.9% of income comes in from publishing. It is not always the case that the bigger societies are more diverse and have a wider range of income sources, but that is often the case. So different societies have different vulnerabilities and different resistances. But for everybody, no matter if it's only 5%, it's a 5% of income that really matters to those organisations. So it has been an exogenous shock. And the perturbations, we have seen perturbations and uncertainties that typically follow such shocks, the biggest of which has been the RC UK announcements, and possibly followed in the new year by possible HEFCE announcements at all. If we go back to Finch, where has been the consultation? And I'm talking here about RC UK announcements. Where has been the consultation? Where has been the modelling and any apparent concern for the sustainability of others? Where has been the recognition of the need for time for the learned societies to adjust? In fact, quite the reverse. I can't remember how many days it took for RC UK to announce its policy, but it was very short indeed. One of the key points in Finch Report was that learned societies need time to adjust their business models. So I would go so far to say it is shockingly arrogant, the approach that's been taken by RC UK towards the learned societies in the way that they have reacted. When the sector brings in, and I don't have the figure, but perhaps some of our publishing colleagues do, when the learned society sector, with their commercial publishers, brings in tens or hundreds of millions of pounds of foreign exchange each year through its journals, when the sector doesn't make any call on government funding while providing supporting services for a largely publicly funded system. Just 6 months on then, what are your perceptions from that exogenous shock? We all know when we have a shock, we go through denial, anger, acceptance, data gathering, doing something about it, reviewing the options. So, I've got 3 scenarios down here. And I'm going to ask for a call of hands on each of these 3 in a minute. Are you in the difficult to see a way forwards for the publishing for My Learned Society and its associated wider activities? Feeling squeezed? There are many ways you might be squeezed, but one might be between commercial interests of publishers and the newly introduced market forces in the universities and their intermediaries. Do you think, are you in the sector that is probably capable of adjusting sustainably, reconciled to static or lower publishing incomes, which is a message we have received over the last couple of days? But we can start to begin to see a way through this that may provide us with a way of adapting our business models. Or are you in the, I just can't wait, it's a wonderful, brave new world, we see more opportunities than threats? So let's just take a show of hands. You've got 3 caricatured scenarios there. How many people are in the last one? Just can't wait for the brave new world. It's a world of opportunities. We're there. Okay, how many people are in the middle? Well, it's been a hell of a shock. We are trying to get to terms with it. We think we might be able to see a way forwards if we can work in partnership with all the players and with our commercial publishers. Okay, and I will just ask for the last one. I'm assuming there aren't any abstentions, but how many are in the first group? That's interesting. So 1 and 2, not too dissimilar. Thank you. That's just a. Right. I'm going to address quickly, I haven't got much time, 3 questions for learned societies' business models. Before I do that, I'm just going to digress slightly. But these are the 3 questions that I shall be trying to address. I don't have solutions, but I hope collectively we can start as a community to start to move on from the shock. We've heard some comments from publishers about working together in order to sustain our incomes and make the best of the models available. But we're going to have to move on in other ways as well. So my 3 questions I'll be looking at is, how do we react to inevitable change in the face of huge uncertainty and a lot of risk? In uncertainty and risk in terms of how the multiple different stakeholders are going to behave. The universities, the publishers, RC UK, they're all stakeholders there and they all affect us. My second question is, what strategies might we employ Some of those have been discussed, I think, endlessly over the last couple of days, and you've heard too much about gold and green and different strategies there. And how can we best reduce risk by influencing future agendas around this area? What is our common shared ground? What is our common shared objective? Can we identify them, and do we have the mechanisms to act collectively? When actually no one size fits all. We all face quite different positions in our societies, different challenges, opportunities, different ability to adapt, different resources. Before I get into those questions, let's just think about how we're different from commercial publishers and why those partnerships, therefore, are very complementary and tend to work very well for the learned societies. We, I think, are different, and publishers, I apologise for this, I'm painting you in the corner of being simply profit maximisers. I know you do a lot more than that, but we go beyond purely financial models. As learned societies, our publishing is not just about money. Money is vitally important, it funds our other activities, but our publishing pervades a wide set of other areas of our operations, our business models, our ethos, and our rationale. So, in this sense, it's not just about the activities, the money that sustains the activities that we do to support our academy, the conferences, the events, the membership, and so on that Sally was talking about. Publishing, for us, is also about enhancing the standing of UK research internationally, the gold standard, the quality in profiling our disciplines nationally and internationally, and in providing, in many cases, equity of access for scholars at different stages of careers, in different settings and scenarios through the publishing models we have today. So it's more than just money. It's reputation, profile, and standing. And of course, our publishing helps to underpin our relationships with members. When we did another small survey of some of the social science learning societies, and in fact, the majority felt that that membership income or members joining the society wasn't largely dependent on being able to receive a journal. So it's not just a matter of money. So I think what we've got to start asking ourselves is, where is our balance of interest in this? Why are we doing that publishing? What are we prepared to trade off in the future? Will we accept less money, providing we get the profile, the standing, the reputation, providing our journals deliver that for our disciplines? Or is money what matters most to us? And I think now we're going to be faced with having to think about a little bit more dissociation, perhaps, between the money and those other attributes that the publishing brings for the academy, for our societies, and for our disciplines. So on this list that we have here, why are you doing the publishing? And we're going to have to start to ask those questions and to dig perhaps a little bit deeper. However, that was by way of a small digression. Let's go back to our business model questions, BMQs 1. How do we react? How do we react? Oops, I pressed something here, sorry. Technical? No, it's just gone on my... Okay, that's fine. Right, okay. How do we react to the inevitable change in the face of uncertainty and risk in the response, timing, and impact of the multiple different stakeholders? And I might be wrong in this, but I think the learned societies are unique among that group of stakeholders. Universities, individual academics, RC UK, and the other stakeholders in the debate at the moment. Why are they unique? They're the only stakeholder that has no power. We are dependent on the decisions that all of the others make. All of the other players have some power they can exert. So, for example, an academic he is now a monetized customer, can take their APCs to whichever journal they want to publish in. So they have more power now in the system. RCUK, you've seen the power that they have to demand a mandate. Universities will have power in terms of how they want to negotiate down the APC charges. I hope I'm wrong, but in looking at this, it is the learned societies that are on the ends of everybody's ropes. And everybody's ropes are dangling along at different speeds, at different intensities, and at different times. That is why we, having had one exogenous shock of Finch, we're now into all these multiple aftershocks, each of which we are, to some degree, on the end of that rope. So collective action is absolutely, vitally essential. We have little power, is what I'm saying, in these relationships, and that is inherent vulnerability of the sector. Lacking power, what do we then do as good academically based organisations? We seek knowledge and understanding. Now, you've looked at myths and realities and uncertainties endlessly over the last few days. I've just picked out the ones that seem to me needed to be unpicked, and I'm sure you have unpicked them. Let's just run through them quickly. Learned Society's journal subscription income arises predominantly from UK public money. Not true. 90% of it comes from overseas subscriptions on average. Gold is sustainable for the leading peer-reviewed journals. In terms of a purely gold model, unlikely. In terms of a hybrid model, if we can get it to work, yeah, there's a good chance that we may be in business there. There will be enough public money to fund gold. Well, the RCUK announcement that was made last week sees funding 45% in the first 2 years, 45 to 50% of the publications arising from Research Council funded studies in this country under the gold model, and the rest will be green. And they see that rising up to 75% over a 5-year period. And of course, we've got a spending review in the middle there too. Academics will publish less. It's a favourite mandate of HEFCE. Well, I'm an academic. Many of you are academics. Are you likely to publish less? I don't think so. We'll find different routes into publishing. Academics do not consider journal ranking, reputation and reach when deciding where to publish. You only have to look at Wiley's data they've collected on this to know that they do, and we're hugely grateful as learned societies that they do. It's a very symbiotic relationship. Green OA is free. No, it's not. Somebody has to pay for Green OA, and I think that's been banged on the head yesterday or today. 12-month and 6-month embargoes, 6 for STEM and 12-month for humanities and social sciences, are the right length of time. Enormous debate on this, and I again refer you back to, I don't have time to talk about it, the publishers' associations. Those embargoes are only mandated under some conditions, and RCUK has not made that clear in its announcements. CC/BY licenses are desirable. A major study that's been undertaken has shown that 80% of some large number, was it 10,000? I'm not sure, academics who were polled on this preferred the CC/BY/NC/ND, the non-commercial, non-derivative forms of CC/BY. The world will follow quickly and widely. Well, we had a very interesting presentation from North America in that context today, and I think it's not going to be straightforward. And there's one that nobody talks about, my 10th one, which is that learned societies will actually be subsidising the UK public sector on the basis of overseas subscriptions. To maintain our hybrid journals and to maintain green route with a subscription base to our journal, we can only do that with overseas subscriptions. 90% of our subscriptions come from overseas. We're going to reduce double dipping in the UK or not have that, so UK subscriptions will go down to those journals. And therefore, we are running that journal on the basis of overseas subscription. But in running that journal and keeping it sustainable, we are providing a green route for the research councils so that people can publish 50% of their output of publicly funded money through that green route. So the Learning Society is far from being, as it was suggested at the top, the recipients of UK public money through this change. We are actually going to be subsidising UK public endeavour more than ever. So, business model question 2. What strategies can we employ for our publishing and for our wider business strategies across our learned societies? All I'm doing here is pulling out some examples of the way in which some societies do diversify their income sources. Now, clearly, there are a set of strategies, the first group there, that relate to our publishing strategies in partnership with our valued commercial partners. And then there's also a set of strategies, the middle group there, that relates to our wider income sources and how we might adapt those. And then there's a set of skills and activities at the bottom that I will come to at the end of this section. So in terms of that first set of strategies, the sustainability of our journals, I suspect you've covered most of those. We've covered most of those over the 2 days. Sadly, I couldn't be here yesterday. But it does mean that we have to ask ourselves, what is sustainability? Nobody in these discussions is saying we're going to retain the same level of income from our journals. Some people say we might get more for a short period. Some publishers, some situations are suggesting, I think, that we will sustain the levels of income. But there's also that warning that comes through in many instances. We can expect our levels of income from publishing not to fall off a cliff, but to decline to some degree. So what does sustainability mean for us? I can't answer that question, but I think we should all be asking it. And in terms of what actions can we do, I'm sure Philip this morning talked about looking after our authors, looking after our reviewers, our customers in a new monetised world. We want them to continue to use our journals and support them. Make the hybrid model work as best we can, finding that right mix for the hybrid model so we sustain our subscription base, enabling us to offer green route, at the same time enabling us perhaps to be sensible or to be able to offer a gold APC that is affordable by a significant number of people within that sector. And, of course, with our partners expanding into new publishing markets. And then there's the route of developing new journal income streams. Many societies, I think, are starting to think about offering an open journal as well, a cascade journal alongside starting new journals. Sally talked about introducing 2 new journals in her sphere, regional studies, and we at the RGS IBG, working with our publishing partners, will almost certainly offer Geography Open. So those new journal income streams will both potentially open up new money, but they'll hedge our bets on the way the future goes if we head towards a more fully open access world. It helps us to diversify and to buffer the income streams. And of course, in all of this, don't forget that quality phrase in Finch, quality, quality, quality. We must maintain our journal standing and profile, reinforcing quality and brand. Now, I can see Martin getting slightly twitchy.
No, I'm not.
Okay, all right, good. I'm going to stop soon, I promise you. Strategic options.
I'm interested. I'm not twitchy.
Thank you. The wider strategic options. And it's tough to say this, but I just think even if we are secure because of our publishing deals for the next 5 years in terms of income that's coming in, even if we're in that lucky position, we can't afford to do nothing. We have to be planning for the future. And while Finch and RC UK haven't given us the time to plan, I think for many, but not all of us, the publishing deals we're currently wrapped up in and the consortium do give us a little bit of time to plan. So the message is to start to plan rather than to continue with business as usual. So 3 areas in which we can start to look at how we rebalance our activities around the entire business model of the Learned Society. And here, one, of course, is increasing our membership income. You've seen Sally's membership increase in the RGS, Royal Geographical Society, with the Institute of British Geography. Our membership, too, has continued to grow. We have the option of raising fees, difficult in the current circumstances. We see the chemists and others starting to substitute, perhaps, membership income for publishing income. So seeking to offer deals on APCs to new members or to existing members in order to retain members, and also in order to attract new members, so the membership income grows even if the publishing income shrinks a little bit. And of course, there's the opportunity to widen our membership. And so we took, in the RGS-IBG, we took the decision. We've been through a period of considerable change, but we took the decision a few years ago to offer a wider membership category, not just a fellowship, to invite people who are the public, who wanted to learn about our world through geography, to become members. We have 4,000 members who do that. I'm not saying that's a model for everybody, but there are different membership. The key here is that if we look across our organisations, there are some quite interesting and quite different membership approaches. The second is to rebalance income sources, find new ones. We've talked about the tripartite stool of income, publishing, membership and events as the 3. But there are others. There's newly emerging ones. Pathways to impact. We've heard about the role of learned societies in knowledge transfer. We're beautifully placed in many cases with access to policymakers, academics, and a wider audience to be partners in pathways to impact. So there are they're not core sources of income, but they are sources of income that are project-based, that we actually are in a very good position, given who we are and what we do, to start to work with. For some organisations, it's about more emphasis on fundraising. On corporate partners, a dirty word for many people, but actually in certain sectors, corporate partners can help with core resourcing. And legacies. There's commercial enterprise as well, and consultancy services are another way in which some organisations are seeking to widen their strategies. And then, of course, there is the cost reduction strategies, alignments, sharing resources, pooling administration of membership, alignments between organisations that share common goals and can share staffing resources. Dare I say mergers? I mean, some alignments lead on to mergers. Do less, focus on what matters most to the organisation. The RGS-IBG, I'm not setting ourselves up as a model. It's just that would be a hopeless thing to do. We're not. But because of different forces of change, we were forced to change through a merger that took place 15 years ago. And we had to adjust and adapt. And we have employed a lot of these strategies. Other organisations have too, in shaping our future. My key message here is time. That has taken us 15 years to do. Right, so the message is one about reinforcing the message in Finch, which is that this sector needs time in which to adapt, both to its publishing models and to its wider business models. And in adapting, we have to ask ourselves, what is our unique selling point? What is our USP? What are our strengths? What can we do better than anyone else? Where can we make the biggest difference? Where are the biggest needs? And how do we get, having identified that place, from where we are now to there? And this happens to have been a shock through publishing. It could have been any other shock. And we will continue to be in a sector where there will be shocks because we are players in the knowledge economy. Learned societies are part of the knowledge economy. The knowledge economy is changing dramatically with the internet, with the way in which people use, share knowledge and information, networking and communication, the way we interact and share. And we're only at the beginning of that change, but it's an inherent part of us as our business of advancing knowledge and sharing and disseminating knowledge. So we've got to learn to become organisations that learn to change and learn to respond, difficult though that may be. And it hadn't been Finch, it would probably have been another shock in the system. So publishing is one trigger. The question then is the bigger one. What is the role of the modern learned society as we move forwards? And this is my first ask of government. They're there in red and blue. Would the government consider showing its value for the learned societies sector by setting aside a fund of money that learned societies could draw upon, particularly those that felt they really needed it, could draw upon to support them in developing a strategic plan? They may or may not have the expertise to develop that plan, may need to buy that in. They may or may not have the knowledge in a sense of how to do that. They may or may not have trustees that are well placed to do that. But should there be a fund that we can call on to help us plan our way through this transition? That's my first question. And obviously in this transition we have enormous strengths. Don't ever let us forget our strengths. Our brands, our reputation, our standing in the community, which is a great strength in our partnerships with commercial publishers. The collective size of our memberships, however many million that collective size is, at least I think well over 10 million. Our knowledge base of experts, our contact networks, and our continuity and legacy. We will be here in 200 years' time. Hopefully, RC UK won't. The BMQ, the business model question 3, is the future agenda, and this is where I'm going to end, in a sense. How can we best reduce risk by influencing the future agenda? What should we do collectively, and is there a collective spirit and will to actually do that? And I believe we are only now at the point when we can start to think about that. There's been lots of calls for lobby earlier. But we have not shared a collective. We've been through a period of understanding, and we're now starting to be at the right time where we can come together, understand what the shared common agendas are, and bring our trustees along in working collectively to address those or influence those common agendas. I think it took us a period of months to go through those sort of initial shocks of anger, risk and denial, and now we're starting to understand the issues and we can start to have a better influence. So my second ask of government, if anyone in government is listening, which I'm sure they're not, is we all know we can stand up till we're blue in the face and list what we do. We do this, we do conferences, we do knowledge exchange, we support the academy. But actually, it's just words. Government takes notice of numbers. And what we need to do is to commission a cost-benefit analysis across the learned society sector of what the sector adds to the academy and the economy. And let's have a look at that number, or those numbers, and that is our advocacy power. Without that, we're a bunch of academics talking about a page full of words. Therefore, my second ask of government, if you really do want to support this sector, help us to make our case by providing us with the expertise and the money collectively to undertake and commission, it'll have to be done by an external agency, commission a cost-benefit analysis. What else can we do? Well, time is ripe now, I believe, to start to have strong collective voices. We don't all agree on everything, but let's agree on the things we can agree on. We already have some good institutions working with different sectors. The Academy of Social Sciences has its group of Learned Societies chief executives. The Society of Biology is working with STEM, and the British Academy is working with the humanities to lobby. What are the issues that we agree on? The issues that we think will create those unintended consequences that we want to adjust now before the consequences arrive. The things we think are unreasonable and unsustainable restraints. From the Learned Societies, the Academy of Social Sciences meeting of its working group just a couple of weeks ago, there were 3 that we identified: licence type, CCBY, 12-24-month embargo periods, so green embargo periods, and APC levels in terms of the level that we think is appropriately sustainable. And we, of course, need to monitor for ourselves, not have a third party monitor for us, but monitor for ourselves the impact of unintended consequences. And that's my last ask of government: provide a resource whereby collectively we can undertake that monitoring task and raise the warning bells before it's too late, and also, but really to understand how the community in the system is responding. Differential impacts on disciplines, differential impacts on different researchers at different career stages, the transition to the rest of the world, and above all, the sustainability of our leading journals and the learned societies themselves. I think you know why we all feel vulnerable. Speed of change. We're on the end of everybody else's ropes. Difficulty of influence. We can't speak as one voice yet on this issue. Words, not numbers. We feel a sense of loss of trust. We feel we're not valued, not understood. Uncertainty. Can we cope with risk and risk-taking? What's our ability? Do we have some of us not wonderfully resilient. We don't have a lot of money in the bank. We're quite vulnerable. We're forging at the same time, having to forge new relationships with publishers. And for many organisations, the concept of strategic planning is quite new. And I'm just going to end by saying, who will we look back on in 20 years' time and cite as the main beneficiaries of this change? Probably society will be a beneficiary. We all, I think, believe in principle of open access. It's how it's implemented, the moral benefit as a public good. I'm not sure many of us are that convinced that the economy overall will actually benefit. And in practice, who are going to be the beneficiaries? I hope it's us, the learned societies, fit for purpose. I suspect the ultimate beneficiaries are the internet giants. Thank you.
Rita, thank you very much. I'm going to ask the other panelists to come up to the front now, and we'll take the questions and comments to Rita in that framework. So if I could ask David, Philip, Ziad, Sally and Stephen to come and sit at the front. Yes. All right. Good, thank you. In a moment, I'm going to start off with some questions. I'm going to pick up from this morning's panel because we didn't get some questions at the back there this morning. Before I do that, though, just to start off with, I want to ask our panelists whether there's questions they'd like to ask of each other. I didn't, did I? There you go. That's why you're a panel. So here you are. You've got a spectrum of presenters here. Any quick questions for each other? Have I silenced you completely?
Society's question.
Yes, go ahead. And you'll need to cluster around the microphone a little bit there because
maybe David Mackishire.
There you go.
It's new technology. It's our industry, you see. Is it, what one sometimes hears when especially the evangelical wings are making their case in relation to open access, is that when the threats to learned societies are set out, the answer is sometimes, well, who needs them anyway? Are there differential answers to that depending on the sector? Or do all learned societies need to make the same case as though they are all of equal value? And so, is the case that defends the right of the Institute of Physics, American Physical Society, in a context where, if David's statistic is right, that 90% of everything submitted is accepted because it's become sort of a settled science, as it were, different from the relative contribution that learned societies make in the social sciences?
Right, great question. Okay, Rita, do you want to start off with that? And then we'll go to Sally and Stephen.
Okay. I think in principle it's the same. Mm-hmm. I think we exist to advance knowledge, to represent and profile our disciplines, to create networks of knowledge sharing and exchange in the academy, and to support practitioners in a variety of ways through professional development and other activities. So I think we all share broadly the same common goals. We get there in different ways, and we fund that in different ways.
Sally?
Yeah, I'd like to echo really what Rita says. I also think there's a danger of being separated into different sectors. I think really we need to try and, as much as possible, use a collective voice at the moment.
Thank you. Stephen?
I agree with that. Nothing to add.
Okay. One more from have you got a question you'd like to ask the publishers at this end of the table? Seeing as it would be symmetrical, wouldn't it?
I'd like to ask the publishers. And obviously we've got publishers here who are committed to publishing with the learning societies. Do you think what we're going through at the moment will overall strengthen those relationships or weaken them?
Right. Philip, are you looking like you'd like to answer that?
I think generally it will strengthen them. I think that's not universally the case, though. I think what you've called the shock to the system, the perturbation, will make societies and publishers realise that they bring different things to the party and that they're stronger together than apart. So you've listed some of the things some of the assets of learned societies in one of your slides just now, so I won't repeat that. But you obviously, to a publishing partnership, you bring your brand, your pedigree, your expertise, your content, your community. There'll be others. The things that publishers bring to a relationship are rather different. They bring money, they bring publishing expertise, which is quite important because publishing is a fairly complicated business. They bring technology, they bring sales and marketing. So if you put those two together, it seems to me that publishers are stronger with societies and societies are stronger with publishers.
Thank you. David?
I think less so in the journals world, but perhaps more so in the books world, and I think that open access, certainly in the UK, from what we're hearing, is about to hit our books publishing operations sooner rather than later. I think we like to think that as each imprint we do bring, I think the journals are the key brand, whereas I think in book publishing it's much more so that reputational factors of the publisher, and we like to think that Routledge has got a good tradition of almost changing subjects and publishing some of the key voices in the emergence of subjects over the years, and I'm sure Wiley Blackwell and Sage will make similar claims for their areas of strength. And we are committed to quality and excellence in that publishing. It's not just about, we think that drives revenues and profits. So we're as concerned about reputational factors, quality and excellence, and I think the learned societies, what Rita was saying, that there is more kinship there, in my opinion, and we welcome those closer partnerships.
Thank you. Sid?
Yep, I think stronger rather than weaker. I think Felice Levine was giving us an example of that earlier. She was talking about how many societies are increasingly reliant on richer and closer conversations with their publishers than they probably needed to have before. And then to reiterate this point that David's making, I think when people look at industries, sectors, and they say, it happened in music, it happened in journalism, it's now going to happen in the world of academia, they ignore the fact that in the world of academia, popularity isn't enough. Authority is critical. It's a critical thing that marks out the person whose voice deserves to be heard, rather than is just a free-for-all. And I think both learned societies and academic publishers have a common interest in ensuring they preserve the concept of excellence, expertise, and prestige, whether it's through journal brands or whether it's publisher brands too. So I would say that the interests are even more aligned.
Thank you. Right. Let's go to the floor, shall we, and to the back. And if you could say who you are and if you are directing your question at a particular member of the panel.
I'm Helen Rogers. I'm an editor of the Journal of Victorian Culture, which is produced by Routledge. If we're talking about what we're bringing to the table, and academics may be bringing authority, I think that we need to have some honest discussion and costings from the publishers about what exactly you're bringing to the table. So you talk about you're bringing money to the table. What money? What money goes into marketing in a digital environment? What money goes into sustainability? The Finch Report is full of costings on how much universities are paying for library subscriptions, the costs of library bundles, etc. We need to know what exactly, what resources, what money goes into digital journal publication, so that in order for us to be able to work out how this economy, we've been talking about how this is a complex economy for 2 days, but without any real kind of figures in it. So where are we going to have those discussions? Where are we going to exchange that information?
Thank you. David, would you like to start off with that one?
Well, I think with three of us here, we'd be in trouble with the anti-competition authorities if we were all to reveal completely what we're all paying and what all our business models are. I don't think we're actually allowed to talk about that, apart from saying as a trade and industry body. And there has some work that has been done within the Publishers Association and some of the other associated bodies, including ALPS, which has got some very clear areas of the extent of money. I know that the fastest growing cost line for Taylor and Francis and Routledge journals, because my MD and my FD beat me up about it all the time, the fastest growing line is not production, which the production costs are pretty much static, and they're not particularly going down in a digital world. But the fastest growing lines are the returns in royalties, expenses, and what we put back into the academic sector. So, which goes with our territory really on the publishing side. But we can share that as part of an ongoing discussion, and we can go through it. But I think you need to look at it in terms of the overall investment in things like platforms, functionalities, initiatives. There is an awful lot that does go on, and yes, we all take the blame. We have hit our light under the bushel about this.
You want to come back with that, yes?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, perhaps one of the things that we can consider, once we know how much money you're putting into those platforms, perhaps RC UK should be putting money into setting up platforms which we can use, rather than sending out pots of money to different universities to start paying people to administer APCs.
Haven't they put Jimmy Wales in charge of this?
Actually?
Well, yes, no. If I could, though, in fairness, also direct that question back to the learned societies, who are also publishers. And Sally, maybe you could address that question in terms of the issues of cost and benefit and transparency, because you might not be constrained by some of the same restrictions.
I think you need we need to be a little bit careful about, I don't know the journal that you're talking about. It may be a journal that's owned by a society, it may be owned by your department or institution, it may be owned by the publisher. So the individual case will depend on your particular circumstances. For the societies, I think it would be fair to say that most societies, when they're negotiating their publishing contracts, go to some considerable length to make sure that they understand the very different offers that come from the different publishers. It is the case that we go out to tender. The Regional Studies Association certainly uses publishing consultants to help us understand exactly what we're being offered and exactly what the pros and cons are of the different ways in which publishing contracts are constructed. It's not an easy area, and it gets more complicated, not less complicated, partly because the number of income streams diversifies, and as our journals become more international, we become more reliant on things like exchange rate and so on. So it is difficult. Do the learned societies benefit financially from their relationships with the commercial publishers? Well, Regional Studies Association has certainly had a very fruitful and financially rewarding relationship with our commercial publisher, and we use that money to reinvest in our field. So I think it would be a mistake to leave this conference with the impression that the commercial publishers are not doing some of their bit for the wider academy.
But let me, at the risk of hijacking your question in a way that you didn't intend it, you mentioned, Sally, that your learned society has in the past made a healthy surplus. That healthy surplus, of course, will come from a lot of institutional journal subscriptions, including my own university's library, and many of our universities have seen their journal subscriptions go up at substantially greater than the cost of inflation year after year. So there is the phenomenon of the eternally angry librarian out there, and there might be one or two here. So I think also the question is, if you, whether you're a learned society or whether you're a commercial publisher who are publishing ultimately to shareholder benefit, are showing a surplus, the surplus is coming out of library subscriptions that are going up higher than the rate of inflation. So I think part of the question, if I understood it correctly, is where are the added costs that are justifying that constant apparent increase in the cost of publishing?
I sense that Rita's got
Oh, Rita.
No, I think in terms of the added costs, I'll leave the publishers to talk about their added costs around discoverability and all the sort of technology that they sit behind that, and also in terms of their marketing. I think it is fair to say, though, when we did look at, it wasn't a completely thorough survey, but when we did look at the subscription rates for journals published through learned societies, and there's a figure from a paper produced in the United States that learned societies worldwide publish about 50% of the world's leading journals, and that those subscription rates, in some sectors at least, tend to be towards the lower of the end of the subscription rates. So the learned societies do, and I can only speak for us in the RGS-IBG here, we do have some pretty, robust conversations with our publishing partners around percentage increases in subscription rates, because we wear two hats. We wear the hat as being a publisher, but we also wear the hat of our community and our readers. And so we take the opportunity, wearing those hats, to have those discussions and to seek a rate that seems reasonable. I can't speak for other learned societies, and I think we probably give our publishers a bit of a tough time in some ways.
Okay, thank you. A question here. And then I've got a couple more over on this.
Yes, well, thank you very much for a hugely interesting discussion. As an academic, I have to remind myself every so often that actually we're talking about research. And this is a government which espouses evidence-based practice. And I'm not sure I've heard of an awful lot of evidence. So we're embarking on a huge social experiment, which a lot of people had anxieties about, and we're not quite sure where we're going. And Rita's highlighted that actually we maybe need to undertake a little bit of finding out. I think we need to have a very strong policy that we should lobby for, in a year's time, to have a high-profile research initiative, and it would probably have to be international because we're all stakeholders, to see where we're going and whether this is the right way, because a lot is at stake. If anything, our research.
Thank you. Let's take a couple more, and then we'll come back to the panel on this. At the front here. There we go. Yep. And then gradually that way.
Thank you. Nick Rushby from the British Journal of Educational Technology. It picks up on a couple of points. Actually, one of them is the business of evidence, which is an area where I think the Willits report or the Finch report, whichever we're going to call it,
not the Willits report.
is somewhat lacking in hard evidence. Lots of opinion, but lacking in hard evidence. Kurt Levine once said that nothing is as practical as a good theory. And in my world, that's a good model. It's a model where, by moving the levers around, I can understand what might happen to my journal if the publishers do something, BERA do something, I do something. There are some models around. They're not terribly good, I think, but there is a move underway to see whether we can develop some better models. But coming back to the models which already exist, and this is where I quite like the quick comments of the panel, they show that under most circumstances, not all, but most, a move to open access results in a reduction in quality. And I'd quite like the panel's comments on that.
Okay, who's going to start?
I'll kick us off by saying it's...
Do you want to say what that study was?
Well, while you're looking that up, I mean, one thing I mentioned in my talk earlier was feedback we were getting within the social science community that an author-pays model could lead to distortions and sort of problematic incentives for journals who are supposed to be strict about the peer review process, and therefore it could lead to diminution of standards. That's so, and one hears it more in the social sciences than in the STEM areas. So they're concerned that if you're paying to publish, that becomes the core revenue stream from the point of view of the editor, and therefore could create pressures to basically lower standards. That's one concern that has been expressed that I've heard.
Yeah. Rita?
I would just say that it may be a concern that's been expressed, but I think it's the importance there that we place on our editorial boards and our links back into societies, because if that were to happen, we're shooting ourselves in the foot because we stand for quality and excellence.
I mean, yes, I think Felice might like to come in on this, because she made a point about we might be here talking about predatory open access publishers. Thanks, Bruce.
Yeah. And I would definitely reiterate the point that in an environment or an industry where the ACME is having authority, having credibility, I agree with Rita's comment that it would be totally self-defeating to lower those standards. It doesn't mean to say, though, there aren't lots of new entrants who are coming doing that. And in fact, there is a watch list of what are known as predatory open access publishers who are scooping up content, and they are spraying and praying. And I sometimes receive emails, as I'm sure other people in this room do, saying, why do you submit to our wonderful journal? In fact, why don't you edit it? Well, actually, I'm not an academic. So that's the only thing I'm saying is I think there is a concern about those dynamics opening. But I think that anyone who's got a trusted brand has spent a long time gaining it and will be very quick to lose it. So I think we'd be idiotic to allow the same.
I was going to make that point. It is about the brand of the learned societies. We really can't afford not to be on a quality march. And for that reason, when we've been talking about our new open access journal, quality has been at the forefront of that. We also seek to have an impact factor for that journal in due course. You don't do that if you're publishing second-class research.
Thanks, Eddie. David, seeing as you now got that file provocative, you opening.
Yes. I don't know whether it's peer-reviewed or not. It doesn't say what journal it comes from. It's econometrics and it's got an awful lot of equations on it, and its notion of quality seems to be something about maximising social welfare. So I'm afraid...
It's a green preprint because it was peer-reviewed.
Okay. I don't know what journal it's... All right, okay. If you send me the references to them, I'll get people who understand equations to look at them.
Thank you.
Okay, I would say that I absolutely agree with Ziad about the predatory publisher watch list. It's very interesting, very useful to monitor because often these people are also trying to sell their operations to some of the larger, more reputable publishers. I think there's the Fast Buck Brigade have absolutely got in there. But I would say that there is something inherent about a fully open access journal that is fraught with danger if you're not careful around things like quality, authority, etc. And that is that there's no such thing as a page budget. There's no such thing about revenue being generated by how successful the sales are and how popular that journal is. It's all about how many articles can you publish. That is the main driver of revenue generation. It's quantity. So there is a tendency for peer review standards to start to slip if you don't set it up quite carefully and be absolutely explicit up front about what you're doing.
Thank you. Let's go over here. Where have we got?
My name is John Benning. I'm from the University of Leicester. I'm also chair of the College of Learned Societies of the Academy and treasurer of the Political Studies Association. So I feel I've got a very great interest in all of this. My question is about the risks of the proposed timetable, because I'm very conscious of the expression err in haste, repent at leisure. And it seems to me that there are enormous risks in the policy that's being implemented so quickly by the government and its agents. I'm thinking particularly of risks, for example, to academic freedom. We don't know how universities are going to use the money they've got, whether they're going to promote orthodoxy, particular areas of disciplines, particular disciplines. The threats to the UK's reputation internationally, it seems to me that there are very serious potential risks, such as we're just discussing now on quality, to our reputation, which is generally very good internationally, and also the risk to the learned societies. So, in view of these risks, does the panel think this is a huge gamble?
Thank you. Who would like to start on that? I mean, Rita has virtually said that it is already, so she answered the question, I think, in her talk. Rita, would you like to add anything other than to say that that's what you said?
I agree. I mean, I think time, the time scale is too fast, and it hasn't really got the period of reflection in it and sensible discussion. That does two things. It poses risk because of the speed, but it also it creates less potential for constructive discussion between the key players, because immediately people are on the back foot and, you know, feeling cornered and aggressive or however they respond. So I think that is almost as damaging, because it it means we don't now have an easy, constructive way forwards.
Stephen?
I would absolutely agree with that, and I think it kind of ties into the point. Well, the reason why it's happened so quickly is because it isn't an evidence-based policy. Yeah? That if you're developing an evidence policy, basically you talk to folk about it, and the word gets around. This is underway. But no, there was Finch, announced at a time when the attention of academics tends to be a little bit elsewhere, and you have the very quick decisions that just happen straight on that. So the way I read this is it's a kind of principle-based policy, and the principle is that publicly funded research should be published. But it was very clear that the gentleman from HEFGI did not wish to engage upon the definition of publicly funded, because it is highly contestable. Plus also, when you think of the extent to which higher education institutions nowadays are not dependent upon public funding to a very significant extent, the whole thing actually becomes hollow. So you have a principle-based policy that is not a very good principle that causes damage. Yeah, I think we have to be worried about it. We have to collectively organise to respond.
Philip?
Well, just on this theme of evidence, I had a meeting last week with the chief executive of one of the research councils who said, well, the thing is, everybody has very strong opinions on the basis of no evidence. And when he'd said this 3 times, I scratched my head and said, well, of course there's no evidence because it's not implemented yet. I'm sorry. So, I think just to pick up John's point, yes, it makes sense to avoid positions you can't retreat from, and indeed think of, as it were, positions you might be able to retreat from if things don't turn out as you expect. Secondly, we still live in a dynamic environment, so HEFGI's told us pretty much what they're going to do, but they haven't told us everything. But I'm mindful that RC UK may indeed change the goalposts, move the goalposts a bit. So they've set out mandate positions, but they've said, this isn't forever, you know. So they, I think, have a clear policy that they want to move everyone to a goal position, and therefore whatever latitude they may allow for green embargoes at the moment, they may change in the future. So I think we have to be aware of that too, and not think that, as it were, all the rules of this game have so far been written. I don't think they have.
Thank you. Another question here and here, all clustering around here. There we go.
I wanted to commend the presentations on the learned societies because I felt that, otherwise that was the element in danger of being forgotten in all this. So I wanted to emphasise the scale of the task following Rita's and Sully's arguments facing the learned societies by two things which are blindingly obvious to those of us within them, but perhaps not so much outside. I mean, Sully indicated we're not publishers. 2 points. One, most learned societies, correct me if I'm wrong, are UK charities. We are regulated by UK charity law. That means profit is a non-operative word. We can make surpluses, and we can, under Charity Commission guidelines, build up reserves. We are advised, almost required to build up reserves to about 1 year's worth of financial turnover. Beyond that, when we make surpluses, unlike publishers, we have to divest them. We have to reinvest them. That means that there is no fat on these learned societies. And when it comes to, Martin, things like subscriptions and decisions, there are challenging discussions, but in the end, if subscriptions rise, from the learned society's point of view, we know that that income is simply ploughed back into the academy in some way or other. First point. Second point is that while learned societies do employ full-time people to run parts of their organisation, the fact is that a vast proportion of the work done by learned societies is done on a voluntary basis by academics in addition to their day job. Now, obviously, they do that as part of their professional competence and their performance and so on and so forth. But when I look at Rita's outlined sort of proposals, this is a very radical, a huge amount of work to do, and really societies do not have the manpower in order to carry it through very easily. So I think those two factors really highlight just the mountain that we have to climb in the coming period.
Thanks, Martin. Let's take a couple more questions from just in that little part of the floor here, and then we'll come back to the panel again.
Hello, Helena Djorkovic, Political Studies Association. I think clearly the science community, STEM subjects, have been making the running all of this. At an ESRC meeting for learned societies earlier this week, Paul Boyle said, gosh, we've done very well to get 12-month embargo period because all the science research councils were pushing for 6 and they can't see why we should have anything better. Similarly, I was in a conversation last night with the MP for Cambridge, who himself is a scientist, and absolutely refused to accept that there was any difference, that the social sciences and humanities are any different and should be viewed any differently to the sciences. So what can we do to try and actually persuade the learned society? I think some of the learned societies in the STEM subjects we do have something of a dialogue with them, but I think we have to do more to work with them to make sure that they actually recognise, and so don't lead the argument, because they seem to be fully behind what RC UK, as you said, those are the research councils that have been pushing for it. And so I'd like to ask the panel what we can do in that regard, because I think that dialogue has to improve.
Let's take that one more there, and then we'll come back to the panel.
Hi, I'm the managing editor of the International African Institute and also on the Council of the African Studies Association of the UK. I wanted to ask about books and sort of add the books I mentioned to this discussion. We published 2 journals which in effect cross-subsidise the publication of about 3 book series. And, publishing really is our raison d'etre, and I think it's mostly what our community wants. What's going to happen to books? Do they have to be on open access as well in the REF 2020? Will authors pay for book publication? We were approached by De Gruyter's open access arm Versita, who were quoting £6,000 to £8,000 author charge per monograph. Will the universities come up with that money? I just wanted to put that out there. I think books are still important in the humanities and social sciences.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to come back to the panel on all of those questions together. Just on one point from me, and I think Rita would probably agree with this, on the question of the evidence base in Finch. The overwhelming evidence base in Finch, as in many other areas, is in fact from the experience of the Wellcome Trust. And a lot of the modelling that was done, and there is a substantial amount of evidence behind Finch, in fact, if you look at the full report. But the modelling that was done on average APCs and the projections of those are by and large based on the Wellcome Trust experience, which has been substantial. But it underlines the point that a number of people are making here, of course, and that is that it's coming out of the medical sciences. The reason for that is simply that there isn't other evidence to turn to yet, and that's the point about it not yet being implemented. But if I could come back to the panel on that cluster of questions, who'd like to start off? Maybe we could start with books so that we don't forget books. Who's got a view on books? Stephen, you must have a view on books.
Well, absolutely, and I did understand the position was that books at the moment are in the slightly too difficult pile, and that discussions will continue about books. Having said that, I personally am just curious about the contrast between the cost of purchasing a monograph that sort of reads it out on the one hand, and the cost of a print-on-demand book that one can get from ABE books and other such like sources. And I really just don't understand the connection between those two things. And but I imagine that someday there will be a connection, and indeed somebody may already have made it.
Thank you. Who else wants to come in on that or other issues from the panel?
Not books.
Not books, no. We'll come back to books a bit later.
I'll go on books.
Oh, you're going to go on books, thank you.
Yes, I see Frances Pinter was due to be here. Well, perhaps she can explain her model. I would just say that there is we run quite a successful South African journal publishing operation, but we came across at the STM meeting in Cape Town earlier this year, the Human Sciences Research Council, which is government funded, runs a very successful open access books publishing operation, but it is all government funded. The South African government is absolutely committed to having a world-class book publishing sector going forward, and they do subsidise what is a very successful open access book. So it can work, but it involves governments getting behind it. And as we're seeing, I think there's a degree of backsliding going on about how much they're going to get behind some of the fully funded transition that Finch/Willits envisaged.
I want to put Francis in front of the mic in a minute on that issue. But while that's getting there, shall we just get back to the other questions? And then I want to invite Francis to come in on the issue of books.
Well, if I can jump in with books being a segue back into some of the other questions, because that's, again, one of the differences between STEM and HSS, the extent to which people can build their career through book publishing is much more widespread in the social sciences. And again, one of the ones that's somehow sort of taken out of the picture. It's not typically the way people build their careers in high-energy physics. And I think that's a sort of a lead-in to a general point, which is, it goes back to the one I was asking earlier about, do learner societies do the same job in all the different sectors? I can absolutely see that they have lots of commonalities, but it may well be that the membership of learner societies in some of the STEM subjects are willing to say, I don't know that we need this umbrella organisation. I've definitely heard that in some contexts. Because we can do it all ourselves. We can rig it up on the internet in our backyard and we'll talk to each other. To what extent that may or may not be true, in a way, is not something I'm qualified to judge on, but I would say that in the social sciences, I think learner societies absolutely make sort of satisfy all the kind of claims that you've been making out for them, Rita, that it's one of the crucial ways of establishing prestige and brand and authority. And actually, going back to an earlier point that I wanted to make, that I think I made in my spiel earlier, was that the focus on access is usually a focus on the consumption of knowledge, but not so much on the production of knowledge and production of high-quality knowledge at that, which occurs in different contexts, under different conditions. And you almost probably need sub-sectoral solutions for each of those. What the physicists need, they've had archive for 15, 17 years. They've been posting open access articles all along. Where journals fit within that will be for those who are close to it to explain and say. But I don't think it automatically reads across in every discipline. And so life sciences and medical clearly are sort of majorly funded not just through public funds, but also through huge private funds. And they have made a go of, and a very successful go of, the Gold Open Access model. And as I said, whole companies like Biomed Central is publishing about 20,000 Gold Open Access biomedical and life science articles every year. It's a thriving, successful journal.
It's the biggest journal in the world.
And PLOS ONE, is the biggest journal in the world, publishing itself nearly 20,000 a year. So Biomed Central, PLOS ONE, Hindawi are all the examples that this model is actually well established. It's not surprising that some people are saying in some of the STEM areas, there's nothing wrong with these proposals. The question is, does it read across into the social sciences? And I think that it doesn't in so many ways. And the feedback we've been getting, as I said, clusters under issues around funding, which are massively divergent, issues around sustainability, and including the half-life questions about needing impact over time. And it's not all subsumed in the latest article, captures all the science behind it. It's this what the LSE calls this dynamic stock of knowledge, which is being represented by the social science effort. The question of neutrality that has come up in various fronts, academic freedom, whatever, and relationship between a social scientist and their university, and this question of authority and stamps of accreditation and prestige and approval, which are in some ways more fought over and contested in the social sciences because it's by its nature a very dynamic enterprise. And so the roles of prestige journals, the roles of respected publishers, the roles of learner societies, I think are all seen as incredibly valuable from an HSS perspective. And I think that's where I think the rubber hits the road with this somewhat. But I think the conversation has moved along, and there will be this big GRC meeting in May, and maybe REC UK goes global from that point.
Thank you. Rita?
Yes, can I just come back on the STEM and humanities and social sciences? I'm sure Martin will attest to this, that it was something of an uphill struggle, but we did actually, in Finch, get a recognition that the social sciences and humanities are different. There were 3 learning society representatives, biology, chemistry, and me. Unfortunately, the members of the panel, there were some social scientists. So that is recognised in there in part, thank goodness. And that's not to claim the recognition for doing that. But I think there are differences both within and between. So if you take STEM subjects, there are some disciplines there who, for whom there is a longer half-life and readership half-life, so you can't really just cluster within those groups. But I do agree that it's vitally important that there is a dialogue and that the scientists do better understand, and really not just understand, i.e. listen to, but appreciate the differences. And I think that comes under the sort of category that I was recommending, is that we do a cost-benefit analysis and we have the capacity to monitor, and that those particular subgroups are all involved in that monitoring process. And as part of that, there is then the opportunity for a dialogue systematically between the groups. I agree.
Philip? So also in answer to Helena's question, I think we have to make the argument, as I said this morning, I think we have to make the argument that the microeconomics of publishing in the social sciences and humanities are different from STM. And just to illustrate the point very simply, many social science and humanities journals may only publish, say, 40 papers a year, compared to science journals that may publish 400 or in some cases 4,000. Now, you just apply an APC figure of, let's say, £2,000. So 40 times 2,000 gives you a very different answer to 400 times 2,000 or 4,000 times 2,000. So I think we need actually to lobby the funders and the decision makers about the very practical and simple arithmetic of the economics of journal publishing in our fields. And I think we also need to reiterate the point about half-life. RC UK doesn't accept the argument about half-life. They think it's irrelevant. They say that the only reason they are willing to agree to a longer embargo period for SSH is because they think that we in the SSH fields need longer to get our act together. Give me a break. I mean, that's not the argument from our perspective. The argument is about half-lives, and we need to reiterate that and demonstrate the case, as I think has been done quite effectively through the ALPSP study, which a couple of us referenced earlier.
Thank you. Let's go to Francis and hear a little bit about the book question again.
Okay. Before I talk about knowledge unlatched, I just want to remind people that in the Finch Report, there is actually 2 pages on books. And it starts by saying that books are very different from journals. And they're so different, actually it warrants a whole lot more than 2 pages. But I also, before talking about knowledge unlatched, would just commend to you the OAPEN project, particularly the OAPEN UK project. On the website, there's an awful lot of really useful information and studies about open books and how they perform. I am a book publisher, as some of you know, or was until very recently, and I experimented with open access books. And it does look, although the sample is small, that at Bloomsbury Academic we successfully published monographs on open access on a CC non-commercial license, and are actually selling a little bit more than we would have expected on a closed model. There are some examples, other examples where that has been the case with some book publishers, and equally a few that have flopped. My view on this is good publishing does sell. But Knowledge Unlatched has tried to take this issue of how do you get open access in a world where monographs have been effectively funded by libraries. The money for monographs comes from library budgets. And the issue is, can we actually find a better way of using library budgets that's more effective and brings open access? And so what we're trying to do at Knowledge Unlatched is to create an international, and that's international, global library consortium where the libraries will select titles that are on offer from publishers and pay a title fee, which is, in effect, covers the getting to first copy costs, paying for all the costs until the first digital file, including a contribution to overhead, so that the publisher's risk is reduced, but at the same time, and this is what's different from journals, at the same time, the publisher can continue to sell through other channels the closed version. So the quid pro quo for the libraries paying the title fee is that the book goes on open access, and at the same time, if you want a printed copy of the 300-page book, you can buy it through any of the normal channels, digital or print, whatever. This has potential for squaring the circle, at least in the monograph, humanities and social science book world. And we'll see. The pilot starts next year. Anybody who wants more information, see the website, get in touch with me. End of commercial.
Thank you. I think it would be very relevant for the Academy of Social Sciences to think about this issue, because I think the question of the future of monograph publishing warrants a session entirely on its own. We had to work very hard to get even 2 pages into the Finch Report on books. It wasn't in the brief at all, and it was very important to put a placeholder on this issue. And many people here, including myself, who are used to publishing in monographs, will obviously appreciate there's a whole other question. We're getting very close to the end of where we are, and I think what I'd like to do, because I know there are other questions that people would ask, is to just ask each of our panelists to take just about 30 seconds each on a summary point or a summary impression point of where they think we are. I don't think they should attempt to, this is an open access conversation, so they shouldn't try and summarize or close the debate. But a last sort of quick observation to draw the panel bit to a close. Let's start, Ziad, with you right at the end, and we'll work all the way down the panel.
I suppose the thing I would probably reiterate, and it came out strongly in Rita's comments, was that the learner societies, especially the learner societies in HSS, but I can accept learner societies generally, are often reinventing the wheel in slightly siloed ways, and it's across subjects, across regions, and actually they face a coordination problem, and therefore need to figure out how to actually overcome that, to unify those voices. And I suppose, would make a plea to the Academy of Social Science, who are hosting this valuable conference, to step into a bit of a leadership role on that front. I think that there are the Academy represents, I think, is it 44 societies now? It has at its fingertips a way of actually trying to draw together into a few key points what are the most influential aspects of this debate, because there are many that need to get into the right audiences, especially government and funder ones.
David?
Thank you. Philip's colleague, Bob Campbell, and Ed Pence, who is from Crossref, which is one of the great publisher digital institutions, cross-publisher, which we all contribute to. They have co-edited a book recently on academic and professional publishing, which is meant as a handbook for people, middle-level people, or people just coming into the industry, but as more as a general reader as well. In the chapter that I co-authored, which was on publishing strategies, we talk about a new golden age for journal publishing, and I truly believe that we are coming into a new golden age, because the digital technologies are just so amazing and can offer so much. And that is irrespective of whichever business model we look at. I think we'd like to think that since the 17th century, journals are an example of network effects par excellence, and I think the digital technology allows those network effects to get even grander and even greater. I think we're in that period where the ICT industrial revolution, until it's replaced by the biotech revolution in about 2030, I think that's where it's heading. We're really starting to get into the maturity phase of it. And I think there are great opportunities ahead. So despite the fact that we've been trying to worry you by saying there's some strange people with strange ideas out there, particularly coming from Germany at the moment, I think we should all embrace this quite remarkable future that's going to be great for knowledge production and great for research output.
Thank you. Philip?
So this meeting has brought together publishers, societies and others to talk about a situation that's unfolding rather quickly. It's very uncertain, it's very dynamic, and it's terribly complex. So I think this meeting has been a great start in getting publishers and the society community to talk together, because I do think we need to work together. Together we will be more influential, and I think it's together that we should go about the business of lobbying the fund holders and governments on the decisions that are still to be made.
Thank you. Stephen?
I think that one of the most significant areas of difficulty lies in the relationship between open access and REF 2020, which is why the forthcoming consultation is particularly important. I'm not actually clear that HEFCE's worked out its ideas on this yet. I think we were expecting a consultation paper earlier, and now we know it's going to be January, and then indeed there are discussions to be held between now and then. There have been some instances in the past where HEFCE has been persuaded that humanities, social science subjects are different from STEM subjects, and that's something I think perhaps we should come back to. It seems that the MP for Cambridge is a scientist. Okay, well, are there MPs for other university constituencies who are social scientists and might be persuaded that there are significant differences to be found that ought to form the basis of some policy in this area?
Thank you. Sally?
Thank you. I think I'd follow my comments on from Ziad's in terms of coordination. Really, what I would be interested to explore is the role of the umbrella organisations, so the British Academy, the Academy of Social Sciences, and how they are going to help their member organisations to coordinate the policy response to the Finch Report and to the open access challenge that's unfolding in front of us. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
And Rita?
Hi. I think we're in a much better place than we were 6 months ago because we have a clearer understanding collectively of the evolving agendas. I think it's partly what Sally said about collective action, but it's actually about funding and resourcing that, and it's about having a collective ownership of it. It has to be an ownership of every single learned society, if we can, not just of the umbrella bodies. And it will have much more power and force if it is seen to be both the umbrella bodies and the collective of the total. And that's a huge coordination job, and it is also an enormous... It requires dedicated funding. And there's a question, therefore, for the community, which is, do we have the money? Can we dig in our pockets? We can't expect government to fund us to lobby against government. So we have to find a way, if we're going to have an impact, and we really mean to make an impact of making this happen, which means great leadership, good planning, a lot of coordination, a shared, a common agenda, and finding the money to do it. And then bringing into power all the contact networks that we all have, whether it's our local MPs, whether it's our trustees, whether it's our academics who hold positions of power, whether it's our professional members who can lobby from industry. But we need to be really clear about what it is that it is realistic that we are lobbying about, and probably have no more than 3 items that we're going into bat on.
Thank you. I'm down to make a couple of closing comments from the chair. I can't summarise the whole of the conference because I wasn't here yesterday, so I'm not going to attempt to do that. Just a few comments, though, to put it back into the context of the Finch Report, because that's what this conference has been about. First of all, where did Finch come from? And I don't know if this was covered yesterday. Why was there a Finch in the first place? As always in these things, it's useful to follow the money. The initial question that drove the creation of the Finch Group came from the Department of Business, Industry and Skills and the Treasury. And it was a question about how publicly funded IP could be directed towards small and medium enterprises for economic gain. So first of all, I'd like you all to thank Rita and me for saving you from that. Thank you, because in fact it turns out that as the vast majority of small and medium enterprise businesses in this country are probably beauty parlours and hairdressers, they didn't express huge enthusiasm about reading all of your research outputs, and I'm sure you'll understand their point of view. The second reason that particularly, and since we have mentioned David Willits' name, what point did David Willits get it? Well, David Willits got it in a very interesting way. He got it when he went into government at a point when he was trying to finish his book, The Pinch, which is certainly worth reading, and he lost his email address at Oxford University. And when he lost his email address at Oxford University, he suddenly found he no longer had access to a whole series of publications that he had taken for granted that he was getting. And at that particular point, he realized exactly what happens if you don't have the right email address. And I think that's admirable, actually, that a minister should actually get that point. And that has caused a very different attitude in government, I think, to openness than certainly existed in previous governments, where, if you'll remember, under Sainsbury, the drive was for all universities to maximise their profits from their academic work. So we have seen some quite important shifts in that sense. A point that's been made throughout today, and I'm sure was made yesterday, and that is there's a huge diversity of publishers. One of the dangers is that publishers are demonised as outfits that are only driving for shareholder benefit at dividends of roughly 38%, which just happened to be Elsevier's dividend at that particular point. Of course, there is a huge diversity in publishers. The point's been made throughout the day here that learned societies are publishers. Individuals are publishers. Perhaps the answer for a monograph publishing is you need to find the equivalent of shades of grey. If you could get that sort of sales through Amazon, then of course you'd have no trouble getting a return. And the problem is, of course, we all publish things that don't have those sorts of returns. Finch is all about process. It never was going to be a conclusive report. And again, and this point's been made several times, the issue really throughout Finch, and it's been mentioned many times today, is the complexity of the transition, which could be a very long transition of up to 10 years. I think most people think, and David picked up on this in his comments, that some form of open access is inevitable simply because of the movement towards digital publishing. It's affected the music industry, it's affected the film industry. There's no reason at all why it's not going to transform academic publishing. The complexity, and that's what this conference has been about, and this is what Finch was about, is how to manage the transition. The transition is very difficult. And throughout today's very interesting discussion, we are beginning to unravel the details of many of those difficulties. Our focus has been on learned societies. I don't want to embarrass Rita, but if Rita hadn't been there, I can tell you that there'd be almost nothing about learned societies in the Finch Report. And that makes a couple of points. First of all, she did a fantastic job. But secondly, I think it makes the point that you can make a difference by becoming involved in these processes. It is possible to shape the way these things are, the outcomes from them. And although there's a long way to go, and today has highlighted a lot of those challenges, there is a recognition of the importance of learned societies. I would make one point, and I make this as a vice-chancellor, despite Stephen's comments about university management generally, and that is that what I've found in universities UK is that almost no other vice-chancellors get it. I think this is a rather important point. I'm not claiming any particular insight, but a lot of the issues of the roles that learned societies play, the costs and details of electronic publishing and library subscriptions simply don't permeate up to the policy level within institutions. And I do think that there's a critical role for lobbying in this sense, because it is not getting on the agenda. I had a very interesting session briefing Universities UK Research Policy Committee, and it was a very productive meeting. And we set out some of the basics of what open access, green and gold is about. Every single member of that policy committee said that's the first time that they had actually understood, for example, the difference between green and gold. So the message is not getting beyond your librarians, beyond your specialist pro-vice-chancellors and deputy vice-chancellors, or beyond your chief information officers, and it's got to be driven into the policy decisions in institutions. As I mentioned, Finch was a process, is a process. There are lots of gaps in it. It is an imperfect document. Janet, I know, would certainly endorse that viewpoint. There's no doubt that one of the gaps is learned societies, hence the importance of today and yesterday, but there are others as well. For example, one category, a very important person that's not addressed in the proposals that we have in front of us is the role of the independent researcher, who doesn't have an institutional affiliation and therefore does not have any immediate access to APCs for publication in the future. There are a lot of independent researchers out there who don't have the sort of institutional affiliations that they will need to get access to pooled funds for APCs. That's a gap, it's a fracture that's got to be addressed. We have mentioned already, and I would have mentioned it if we hadn't been able to bring it up in this last session, the importance of the humanities and social science monograph. We just were not able to give sufficient attention to that issue. It is certainly in the too difficult pile at the moment, but it's got to be got out of there because there are critical areas of the work that a lot of us do which we simply cannot get into 5,000-word journal papers. It's just not a suitable format, and there's no real substitute for the 80,000-word monograph in many key aspects of what we do. If we don't look to that in the future, they're going to become unpublishable because we're already at a situation where the print runs are so small that the book prices are almost impossibly high. That needs more work. Part of the process then, a couple of people have commented very appropriately, I think, about the rapidity of the policy implementations after the publication of the Finch Report, particularly, of course, and there's been a lot of discussion about this today, the RC UK policy. The point that I would make, and it's been mentioned a couple of times, both from the floor and particularly by Stephen, is what will shape institutional behaviour across the institution as a whole, and the answer is HEFCE. So the HEFCE policy will determine institutional behaviour, and a couple of points on that. We're already seeing that in the comparison between the REF that we're all submitting to next year and the previous RAE exercise. The shift in the policy, for example, that differentiates between 4- and 3-star publications and 2- and 1-star publications means that virtually no university in this country will submit 2- and 1-star publications. You can't be in a 3-star or 4-star publication unless you're publishing internationally. So it automatically means that certain categories of knowledge will not be included in the next exercise because of how the rule set works. So HEFCE, not Finch and not RC UK, will actually determine in Britain the shape of how this plays out in the future. And remember also that the RC UK policy is only concerned with publicly funded research. HEFCE is concerned with all research that an institution wants to submit. And we haven't even considered here the implications for research that is not funded publicly or by a charity like the Wellcome Trust. So I do think, and I'd endorse the comments that a number of people have made, that putting strong positions to HEFCE now and in the January consultation is going to be the decider. Not Finch, not RC UK, it's going to be the HEFCE policy that's the decider about how this shapes up. A couple of final points. Firstly, beyond open access publishing, of course, and again there was a couple of points of mention to this, and this is where I would certainly endorse the point about the golden age we're talking about. Remember, and we all know this, that although we've been intensely discussing open access publication, open access itself connects into, in critical ways, other aspects of the open agenda. Now, the open agenda has been with us for quite some time, of course, started off very much in the open source movement, demonstrating that communities working together were prepared to contribute to the greater good rather than individual benefit. And those open source communities are still out there doing really interesting work. But beyond open access publishing, there's a fascinating world of open data, and the way that open data can, in fact, interlock in a relatively seamless way with the way publication works. And in the future, we're all going to expect open data access to key aspects of open access publishing, hyperlinked through from the publications, that allows us to do our work in very different ways. And that opens up really exciting possibilities. We're also now in a world where there are immense possibilities in data mining and in text mining that allow us to tackle really complicated problems in very different ways. At the moment, that's one of the reasons, I think, why there's a difference between the social sciences and the sciences, because the sciences, of course, particularly fields like epidemiology, will tell you that you cannot any longer solve major bioscience problems without having access to open data text mining and data mining, and in fact you can't do that without open access publishing. That's the Wellcome Trust position. That's what drives Wellcome on this. It's not the open access publishing, it's the data sets behind it that are seen as critical to fields such as epidemiology. But I would suggest to you that open data is going to have fascinating consequences for the social sciences as well, because it's going to allow many of you to do meta-analyses with really complicated global data sets on a whole range of fields that are going to open up all sorts of new possibilities for knowledge creation. So I think that there are important conversations beyond that. I'd just like to end by commending the Academy of Social Sciences for bringing this together over the past couple of days. It's a very difficult thing to do, to organise these sorts of meetings. But I think that these sorts of conversations and developments of positions are going to be absolutely crucial to getting this right in the future. So as well as thanking the Academy, I'd like to thank the panel, and I'd like to thank all of you for being part of that. And I'm going to hand back now for the closure.
Thank you very much, Martin. I feel a bit like Henry VIII speaking to each of his wives. I will say I won't keep you very long. I do want to say a few things very quickly. In terms of influencing the debate, the Academy is having a number of bilateral meetings with BIS and ESRC. And central to that is the work of Rita and the working group of learned societies on this issue of open access. I think we have said, Rita, that although it is labelled as an academy working group, it is open to colleagues in the arts and humanities as well. So if you are arts or humanities-based learned society, you are able to join the working group. Please have a word with me or Rita afterwards, or drop us an email. Secondly, the Academy comes together with others in a grandly titled forum called the Strategic Forum for the Social Sciences, whose membership is the ESRC, the British Academy, the charitable trusts that fund research in the social sciences, the Government Economic and Social Research Service, the Royal Economic Society, and one or two others. And the Strategic Forum meeting this week has been mobilised to look at the whole issue of impact of open access upon principally social science, but bring in humanities and some of the arts too. And they are going to spawn a series of work and try and bring together a collective response. Third thing I want to say is that in terms of support from publishers, our journal, Contemporary Social Science, which you see advertised around here, is a young one. It produces no net income to the Academy, but one of the publishers is endeavouring to assist us in facilitating a number of discussions which are to participate in a number of discussions which are taking place internationally. The conference in Berlin that's mentioned, other discussions in the States, so that the Academy and those who it represents can play into the wider discussions internationally. My sense is that this conference has been seen by many as the seminal event at the moment on open access. Clearly, that the leadership, the lead that we have shown must be taken forward, and together with the Academy Council and the members here today, we will be looking at how we do that. And my final 2 points are, firstly, could you please complete the questionnaire, what you thought about this 2-day event, and leave it in the yellow box at the back as you go out. And the final thing was a note to self. It's been mentioned today by Martin, and it's been mentioned yesterday, I think, by Janet Finch. The note to self says, what is this Shades of Grey book that people keep talking about? Thank you.